Hey everybody, my name is Chet and I am an addict.
Hey, Chet.
That part there that says that we don't identify ourselves as alcoholics and addicts. Somebody told me one time that was like saying I'm an apple and a fruit. Right. If you catch the connotation.
Yeah.
These steps, they're part of what I consider getting clean. Steps 1 through 9 are the getting clean part, and we got a clean house. Steps 10, 11, and 12 are just as important, but they're for staying clean, right? And so there's really two parts. And so you might think, well, the staying clean is the easiest part, but not always, you know. But we're at the part where we need to clean up our side of the street, and steps 4, 5, 6, and 7 are right at the heart of that. We can throw in steps 8 and 9 too, as well as part of our responsibility of cleaning up our past and the damage that we've made. But 4, 5, 6, and 7 are very personal. 8 and 9 you go out and deal with other people, but 4, 5, 6, and 7 is strictly a job on ourselves. And I'm going to share some of my experience with this, both in the beginning and also in recent days. I remember when I first became aware of the fact that there were steps that we had to work. I didn't understand. I just looked at the list and thought I treated it like a Chinese menu. I took 2 from column A and 2 from column B. I chose steps 1, 3, 9, and 12. That's the ones I was going to work. Notice I skipped over 4 and 5 and 6 and 7. Well, when I got to the point where I was really serious, and it took me almost a year to decide that I really was an addict and I had to give up what I was doing. And I had done that a number of times, but found that by myself I could not stop. And so I came back to the program, and it was with a different intention. I had to come back willing to change. And there's a whole lot of change involved with 4, 5, 6, and 7. And part of that was the fact that I had to listen to other people and not just my own head. My first 10 and a half months in the program, I'd hear people say something and I'd say, that's good for them, but that's not the way I'm going to do it. See, I had a little bit of an ego problem too. I thought I knew what was best for Chet. And I hear new people say that today, even today. You know, they think, well, you know, I'm going to do it the way I need to do it, you know. And it is true that we all work the steps differently, but we do work the steps. And the problem was that I wasn't working the steps. I can give you a really good recipe for failure. My first 10 and a half months, I can tell you I did not have a sponsor. I did not read the literature. I did not work the steps. I did not have a home group. If you want to fail in this program, just do what I did. You know? I saw step 4, and I had been to a psychiatrist like twice a week for 2 years, probably about 4 or 5 years before I came into the program. And they were talking about writing down all this stuff, and I thought, well, you know, I don't need to do that. First of all, I told my psychiatrist most of what I needed to say, and I had gotten a sponsor by this time, and he was a crusty old dude. He had 10 years, and I thought, anybody with 10 years has got to know everything there is to know about the program. That's why I picked him as a sponsor. And of course, today, 2 days ago, I celebrated 40 years in the fellowship, and I'm here to tell you I still don't know everything. I still go to meetings, and I still learn, you know. But he said I needed to follow the script and write down everything. And I said, but I know it. He says, write it anyway. And so I did. And I'm very grateful that I did, because something really wonderful happened in the process for me. Maybe it'd be that way for you as well, but it doesn't matter, because we all find the magic somewhere in the steps. If you ask everybody, what was the most important step for you, you may get 12 different answers. This was one of the most important ones, simply because it convinced me that this program works. Because you see, I had this idea that I already knew everything, and when I started writing it down, and I took the very sage advice at the time from a guy who had 3 or 4 years, and he said, just find a place where you can be alone for a couple of hours, take you a legal pad, and just start writing. And he says, if you're honest with yourself, he says, you'll put down all the major things that have happened in your life. And I said, well, what if you forget something? He says, well, that's very simple. He says, you take another 4-step. And he said, you will, because he said, people like you, once you come off the drugs, he says, oftentimes you don't remember things for a year or two. In fact, with me, it was like 3 years. And I remember sitting in a meeting when I had almost 3 years clean, and all of a sudden people were sharing on things, and memories started coming back. And I said, I've got to take another 4-step. I remember stuff that I did not remember the first time, and that's okay. You see, it's a process. It's not a one and done thing where you take one 4-step and say, well, I never have to do that again. It's a continuing process. It's like I had knee surgery. I'm starting to become the $6 million man. I've got 2 metal knees, and and I thought, well, we're just going for the surgery, and I'll be out in a couple of days, and everything will be fine. And of course, anybody who's had that kind of surgery know that isn't true. I had to go through physical therapy for almost 10 weeks for it to get right. I had to do the same thing over and over and over again in order to get that leg to work the way it was supposed to. And I think that's often the way it is with the steps. We don't get everything we're supposed to get the first time we work them. But we have a lifetime of recovery in which we can do that. Anyway, the thing that I realized was that after I wrote down everything, I went back and read it, and an amazing thing happened. It was as though when I had written it down and I started reading it, it was as though I was reading somebody else's stuff. I said, that doesn't sound like Chet. And the thing that my sponsor said had happened was that I had all this stuff up here in my head, and the reason I write it down is to get it out of my head. But if I talk about it, by the time it comes from here and goes out here, it says Chet was a piece of crap up here, but when it comes out, it says, well, Chet wasn't so bad. You see, I have this filter that always kind of changed things, but when I wrote it down, there was no filter. I wrote down the facts, and I was amazed. And I'm so glad that my sponsor insisted that I do it the way it was supposed to be done. I still didn't eliminate step 5. I had to get real honest about that, because all the stuff that I had talked about with the psychiatrist didn't include the things I didn't want to tell him. Right? I remember early on, we don't hear this very much anymore, but I remember early on in the late 70s in the program, one of the favorite things that I heard people say was, you're only as sick as your secrets. And I honestly decided to take the 5th step, and I had about 4 months at a time, 4.5 months in recovery. And I did it because I wanted to get my sponsor to shut up. He kept saying, I need to do this after taking my 4th step. He says, do it while it's fresh, And I finally did it. I didn't trust anybody in the program, because I had heard tales of people taking a 5th step with somebody, and then they went out and got wasted and told everybody what I said, So I had this lack of faith. So I took it with a minister. I figured he couldn't tell anybody, right? And it was a man that I had known for some years, and we were friends. And I remember unloading the 5th step on him, and I did exactly what it says. It says, put down everything, and I did. And I read it to this minister, and I put down things that I've never talked to anybody else with. And sure enough, when it was over with, I looked at him and I said, "What do you think about old Chet now?" And he looked back at me and he said, "Welcome to the human race." I hadn't said anything he hadn't heard, you know. But I carried it around as though, you know, I didn't want anybody to know about it. The interesting thing was that once you take the fifth step and you get this stuff out, I remember being, it was like a month or a month and a half later after doing my fifth step, I was out with a couple of guys after a meeting. We were sitting in a restaurant down in Fort Walton Beach, Florida, where I got clean. And I was telling them things that I had talked about on my fifth step. Now, I wasn't doing that to brag. I was doing it because there was a discussion going on. There was guys that were trying to stay clean, and I was hoping to help them stay clean, you know. There was a purpose to it. And it just amazed me after I stopped and thought about it for a minute. I had held this stuff inside for almost 2 decades. And once I took the fifth step, all of the power of that stuff kind of went away. It didn't hold power over me anymore.
Right.
You know? And that's one of the real beauties of the program. Now, that was my first, fourth, and fifth step. Let's fast forward a bunch of years. I had a sponsor for about 25 years. It was my third sponsor. All of my sponsors died clean, by the way. And this one passed away in 2012. And I really missed him. He was one of my, not just a sponsor, but truly a wonderful friend, you know. And I found that through sponsorship, you know, we really are family. I still sponsor about 6 or 7 guys today, and only 2 of them have less than 10 years. Most of them have between 28 and 41 years. And it's really great because we are just like family. Anyway, as I said, I fast forwarded, and from 2012 to 2014, I went without a sponsor. First time I'd ever gone without a sponsor being clean that long. And I kept thinking, I've got to get another sponsor, but I'd look at this guy and say, well, you know, he doesn't quite have enough time for me. I look at somebody else and say, well, you know, we don't go to the same meetings, and, you know, maybe he's a little too young, and all these other things. I found myself out on the golf course, and I was arguing with myself. And I was out in the middle of a fairway getting ready to hit a shot to the green, and I couldn't even swing the club because I was standing there arguing with myself. And I finally just stopped where I was. I took out my cell phone, and I called a guy that had been a friend of mine. And I had kind of thought about that. One of these 2 guys has got to be my sponsor. And I called one of them, and I said, hey, I need to talk to you. And he said, what about? I said, sponsorship. He said, come on over. And then, by this time, I had, well over 35 years clean. I got this new sponsor, whom I had known since probably about 1.5 years in the program. That's when I moved back to Atlanta. And he said, if I'm going to sponsor you, he says, you're going to have to do an inventory. And my first thought was, don't you know how much time I have? That isn't what I said, though. What I said was okay.
Okay.
And my home group has a spiritual retreat every August. It's the Surrender Group from out in Duluth, just outside of Atlanta. And we have a retreat up at Vogel State Park. Some of y'all are probably familiar with that. We do it at the middle of August every year. This is like, 8 or 9 years we've done it in a row. And it's just a wonderful place, a wonderful time to get up there and actually have some meetings, quiet. I was up there right after it was the weekend after he had told me I needed to do a 4th step. And I just took time while I was up there at that spiritual weekend and did my 4th step. And then came back and did the 5th step with him. And then sure enough, we've been going through, I go over to my sponsor's house every Thursday night, and there's a few of us that meet there, usually somewhere between 5 and 15 people. And we go through the steps in the literature. And when we get through, we go back through the steps again. And sure enough, when we go through step 4, we get everybody to do a 4th step. And when we get to step 5, we have everybody take a 5th step. And so I just did another one back in December of this year. You know, you might say, well, what do you need to do when you've got 40 years? What's the significance of a 4th and 5th step? Well, I'm here to tell you that there is no Saint Chet in the literature. And I'm not going to be the first one. And living clean is an important thing to me, and if I'm left to myself, I can rationalize a lot of behavior that I shouldn't be doing. And so by taking that 4th and 5th step, and it covers a lot of areas today that I didn't really cover on my first 4th and 5th step, like finances, you know, responsibility. And those things are important, especially at home. I've taken over a lot of responsibility at home because of my wife's illness. And so I'm the chief cook and bottle washer now, and I actually kind of enjoy it. But it's because of this program that I simply say that, well, I am responsible. We've been married almost 52 years, and she did for me for a long time, and so I'm going to have the opportunity to give back to her because of this. On to steps 6 and 7. The things I really want to say about that, we sort of come to NA as damaged people. We have different priorities. And a lot of the priorities we can chase back to things inside of us that we think are most important, and the things with the way we behave. And that has to change. You know, we in the steps, and I try to remind people that the list of the steps that we read is just an abbreviation of what the step is really about. You know, a lot of people, they try to pick out the words of the steps and say these are important and so on. It's only because we read that short list over and over again, and I emphasize the fact that it's a short list. If you really want to know what the step is about, we have a lot of good literature that will tell you what the 4th step is about, what the 5th step is about, what the 6th step is about, what the 7th step is about. These things that we read at the beginning of a meeting is just a reminder of what the steps are. So when it comes to dealing with our own personal characteristics, how do we do that? Well, we have to recognize that we have them, and then maybe the hardest part, I don't know how you guys felt, but when I first looked at the steps, I thought we could combine 6 and 7, we can combine 8 and 9, right? And that sounds like a really good observation from somebody who hasn't done the steps. But when you get into it, 6 is really different than 7. 6 is a much more focused on the fact that I have to become willing to change. 7th step then is about how do I actually change. And I can't do it by myself. That'd be like me trying to perform brain surgery on myself. I couldn't do it. I ask for my higher power, whatever that is, whoever that is, to help me in this process. And just to eliminate some confusion, in the steps that we read, in step 6, it talks about character defects, and in step 7, what does it say? Shortcomings. Are those different? I hear a lot of people that emphasize the fact that they're different words, so they represent different things, but they're exactly the same thing. Now, how do I know that? Well, I went back to the source. The first book written on the steps was, I hate to mention this in an NA meeting, but it's the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you look in there to see what it says, it gives you a list of the steps, and then later on in another chapter it tells you what you need to do. And in step 7, it has a prayer that I used many, many, many times. And it says, Lord, remove from me every defect of character. It doesn't say shortcoming. It says, remove from me every defect of character. Same thing as it described it in step 6. So they're exactly the same thing. Except in step 6, I need to become willing. In step 7, I need to ask God to help me with it. But I've heard all kinds of definitions that people, I think they must sit up at night trying to figure out how this program works, so they come up with their own concept, and they say, well, these are different words here. Let's put some meaning on these things. Well, they're exactly the same thing. Exactly. And some things, in my experience, changed rather quickly. Once again, it goes back to that prayer that I remember, and I carry it in my wallet. I have for decades. It says, remove from me every defect of character, and that's where my mind would always stop. I would say that's like being back in church when I got baptized and they washed all the sins away, and I was going to be St. Chet once again, right? And then, sure enough, by Friday, they all came back, right? It's this notion that we become willing that's the important thing. And in this prayer, it says, not only remove from me every defect of character, but it adds to that those things which would prevent me from, or which would allow me to be of service to my higher power and to others. And so the whole idea then is not to get rid of everything that's wrong with me, but to get rid of those things which prevent me from being of service to others and of service to my higher power. And that's an altogether different picture. Because when I look back on it, I realized that when I came in and we got really serious about recovery, a number of character defects got changed. One of them was the fact that I was a loner and I did not even feel like shaking hands with people, much less hugging somebody. It was because of low self-esteem that I had from the way I lived for 16 years. But when I decided that I was going to get into the program and I just started on the steps, I came to a realization that I needed help in step 2 and asked for it in step 3. And all of a sudden the fact that I felt apart from disappeared. And I not only felt like it was okay to be a part of and to shake somebody's hand, but to give them a good hug too, you know. And that was a necessary part of my recovery. We all speak about honesty. Honesty is a big deal. Honesty is necessary for us to even get into this program. But there's other things as well that these special characteristics that are listed in our, my favorite book in this program is still The How and Why. I don't know about you guys, but I remember when The How and Why came out in, 93? Yeah. And I had a group called the Step Together group, and it was my home group for 17 years. And we went through the steps and traditions in that book over and over and over again. And in the book, it talks about the spiritual characteristics of the steps and traditions. And one of the things it emphasized was the fact that humility was essential for just about every step that we had. And we often think, well, you know, I don't do well humble. But the humility it's talking about here is the ability to be able to ask for help. By saying that I can't do it by myself, I'm going to ask someone else to help. You know, so that's my take on it, and I'm glad you guys are here today, and I'm going to turn it back over and let you guys go for it. I went for it about 20 minutes, and I'm going to give Joe the right to go for 20 minutes too.
Thanks, Jack.
And then if you all have any questions, we can talk about those later.
Thanks, Jack.
Thank you.
Good morning, family. My name is Joe, and I'm at it.
Hey, Joe.
And it's a good day to be clean. And I always say that because that's my benchmark for the day. You know, because anytime I think I'm having a bad day, all I have to do is remember that last night and compare it to this very moment, and I know that I'm having a pretty good day. You know? So we're talking about 4, 5, 6, and 7. You know, before we get to 4, 5, 6, and 7, you know, there's 1, 2, 3. And I was taught that 1, 2, 3 was about establishing relationships. Okay? The first step allowed me to reestablish a relationship with myself. It defined who I was, who I'm not, what I can, what I cannot do, what I have power over, and how terrible I manage my life at times. You know. So once I understand who I am, and begin to have a relationship with me and my sponsor, I would say, once you have a relationship with yourself, you won't hurt yourself as often, because you start liking yourself again. Step 2 told me that I need to establish a relationship with something greater than myself. So, and then he broke it down to me. He said, in every relationship, each side has a part to play, and each side has requirements. I was like, really? So, what is the requirement of the relationships with power greater than myself? When I came to Narcotics Anonymous told me that I had to go to meetings, get a sponsor, work some steps. That's part of the requirement of this relationship, right? That's part of it. So I worked around and really worked hard and identified who I am, who I'm not, what I decided to get myself involved into. And then they told me I needed a God of my own understanding. Okay, so once again, in that relationship, I need to know what that God required of me. Since I claim that this is who I'm going to go to at 3 o'clock in the morning when none of y'all are around. And the beauty of it all is I didn't have to have a certain God anymore. I didn't have to have my grandmama's God anymore. See, I was raised by my grandparents. My mom and dad got a divorce when I was 8 years old, and they shipped me from Mississippi. I was born in Mississippi, raised in Chicago, right, with my grandparents. Now, mind you, I'm a kid who grew up with the ideal that his mother didn't like him, right? And you have to keep this in mind as my story goes on into the steps. When a man doesn't trust his mother, he doesn't trust any women, right? Now, I brought that into all my relationships with that thought, but didn't know that I was doing it. Wasn't until I got into the step works. 4, 5, 6, and 7 is a look in the mirror for me. It's an internal look. This has nothing to do with a whole lot of the outside stuff. It works how and why it talks about the 4th step exposing the person that we invented, right? Now, I'm a little guy. I'm coming up on the south side of Chicago. Over there, you're either predator or prey, right? And I chose not to be prey. So that means I had to have a bark, the biggest bark, had to be bigger than life at all times, just so you wouldn't mess with me. And you end up doing some crazy stuff in the process of that. You end up hurting a lot of people in that. But the whole time I was afraid. But I didn't know I was afraid. But I knew I was afraid to let you know I was afraid. Okay. Right? Okay? So I hear that with bravado and boldness, and I thought I always had to be the smartest person in the room. All these type of things, all because I was afraid. These things weren't revealed to me until I got into took that look in the mirror that the program forced me into. Now, I came into this fellowship in 1987, the first time. And I did this, what they call the 3-step shuffle for the first 5 years, refusing to take a look at myself. 3 steps is good enough. I'm clean. I'm happy. I got the job is going good. The kids is in college. Money in the bank. All that. And I was chatting. I was talking earlier, and I said, trying to seek what I had deemed as normal. Growing up on Leave It to Beaver and Brady Bunch and all that, I had this vision of what was normal in my mind, and this is how we supposed to live. But I also understood that I wasn't living that, right? But the program had gave me some normalcy in that first 5 years, and things were going okay. When I relapsed after 5 years, there was nothing going wrong. Nothing. It started off with me wanting to go just shoot pool with the boys after work. And our disease is so slick. It allowed me to go 6 months after work shooting pool with the boys. They having beers, I'm drinking Coca-Cola. Then one day, it upped the trick. It let me have 1 beer and go home. I said, damn, I'm normal again. I'm normal again. I can have one beer and go home and go to work the next day. 3 months later, I'm at the Christmas party. I'm standing in the men's bathroom in the urinal. I'm so drunk that I'm waving, and one of my coworkers said, man, you can't drive home like that. Take a hit of this. For the next 2.5 years, it's just a blur, just pure misery. Even though relapse is not a part of this thing, it can be a reality. And it doesn't care about how much time you got. One of the worst things to be is to know what to do and too stubborn to do it. So when I came back in this time after that thorough butt kicking, and it was thorough, it was very thorough this time around, I was prepared to do anything. Because I can even remember my last night out. I said, God, if you just take it from me, I'll do anything. I'll walk through any door that you reveal to me. I'll serve in any capacity that you present to me. Just take this away. Because if you can't take this away, I'd just rather die. You know, and that's when the book talking about that point of utter desperation. That's what it was for me. So I came to a convention, Chicago Regional Convention. I started when I got back, and I was working as a hugger, you know, or a serenity person. You know, back then we call them huggers, you know. And I met a guy from Racine, Wisconsin. And earlier that day, he had asked me about restaurants, and I was telling him what to do. Later on that night, after the things settled down, I was sitting in the lobby, and he said, hey, man, can I talk to you? I said, sure. So, and basically what this guy did was, he did his fifth step with me. I didn't know him from squat. But I knew that by the end of the conversation, he was crying, I was crying, you know. But when I walked away, I said, I got it, God. This is what I got to do. This is where I need to be. I need to be that honest in looking at myself. So when I came about and got to the point, now, it took me 7 years, almost 7 years to do 12 steps. So this wasn't no quick process for me, right? The steps the first time around wasn't a quick process at all. So when I got back to the point of the fourth step again, and I faced it, you know, the book that Works Out and Why talks about the first 3 steps through the acceptance and surrender and the honesty gives us the courage to face the fourth step. And the fourth step is about courage, about looking at myself just as I am, not who I want to be, but just who I am, just like that. So I go through the 4 steps with my sponsor, and when it came time for me to share my 5th step, I shared part of it with my sponsor and part of it with my pastor. We do some things while we're using. Some of them are not too pretty. Some of them are very dark. And I told you now, I had this thing in my mind that my mama didn't like me, right? And what came out in the 4th and 5th step was I had a deep-seated fear of abandonment. And because of this fear of abandonment, I always had to have a spare in a relationship. I never could commit to one relationship. I always had to have a spare. Now, mind you, I've been married 3 times. I brought that into 2 marriages, that fear, that mistrust, that I don't, you know, just in case you left, I had to have a little side piece, you know, just in case you left me, because I'm still that scared little boy, right? There were some other parts of it that my sponsor looked at me and said, you need to go talk to them people. I said, what people? He said, you know, them therapy people. He said, because you got some stuff that I can't do nothing with, so you might need to go and talk to them. And I was like, you know, first of all, you know, first thing like, well, I'm crazy. You know, he thinks I'm crazy. But then he shared some things about, you know, how his path was and how therapy had helped him get to a certain point. And I had already shared my deepest, darkest. I said, well, it couldn't get no worse than that. So I went into therapy for a couple of years. And it's necessary, because sometimes our literature says that sometimes we need to seek outside help. You know, everything is not in the book that we can do. So I did that because, being a 70s child, I partied through the 70s, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Some of that stuff was kind of dark. Even when it became to my sexual behavior, because I brought that fear of abandonment even into my sexual relationships, right? So it was all about control. I never had relationships. I had hostage situations, right? Emotional hostages. That's what I had all the way down the line. So the fifth step allowed me to go ahead and start to identify exactly what I was doing and exactly what was wrong. And it gave me an opportunity that once it was exposed to do something about it. Here comes the sixth step. Worksheim Wise said character defects are basic instincts that we distort. That's what it said. Basic instincts that we distort. My sponsor says, God is not going to take anything away from you that he's already given you. I said, what do you mean by that? He said, well, you like girls, don't you? I said, yeah, I like girls. He said, you like a certain kind of girl? Yeah. He said, well, God gave us the basic instinct of attraction to procreate our species. As addicts, we take that basic instinct and make it something slimy and greasy and dark. Once we identify that defect, then we have an opportunity to do something about it. So that's interesting. It's very interesting. 4 and 5 wasn't as hard for me as 6 and 7 was. Because 4 and 5 gave me a list of assets and liabilities. Now, mind you, I got 6 children. And out of those 6, 4 of them with college degrees and 2 of them with DOC numbers, right? So I didn't know I've always been conscious of my children. Even in my using days, you couldn't come to my house and use, you couldn't do, certain things you just could not do. How Living Clean said we all have various moral compasses. There's just certain things based on your moral compass that you will or will not do. Period. No matter. And people always say, well, yet. Well, I didn't get to some of those yets. I'm not an addict, because I tell you, I've never done a day in jail. Never. I never been a pimp. I never was a hustler. I worked the whole time I got high. I just used all my money on payday. So I didn't have a drug problem. I just partied a little bit too much on the weekends. Right? I didn't have a drug problem because I kept my job. I still had my house. I still had my cars. I still had all that stuff. I just partied too much on the weekend. But I had totally lost myself. And what 6 and 7 allowed me to do was take a look at me in the mirror. The 6th step actually put me in a fetal position because it made me really question who I am. That person I had invented no longer stood up to the standards that I was living in that day. It got to a point where I didn't really know whether or not I wanted to be the guy that the steps were changing me into, because I was so comfortable with that other guy for so many years that I didn't want to let him go. And the steps had started this transformation in my spirit. It's hard to explain it until you go through it. But the other guy just didn't die quietly. It's just like if you see a person drowning, they go down, they're coming back up, they're fighting, they're going. That's how he went. He went down like a drowning man. He didn't just not go quietly. The 7th step is that next level of surrender. We found that our first level of surrender in the 1st step. And then the next level of surrender came in the 3rd step when I turned my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood him. The 7th step was a different level of surrender for me. Because in the 6th step, God revealed to me who I am, because every time I tried to look away, he would present me over here. I look to my right, he'll put me. He got to the point where I got so sick of my own self that I said, God, do what you got to do. I give up. I can't pick and choose because, some of my defects I like. Some of them I did. Some of them I considered survival mechanisms. They had been my friends for so many years. They had been what I thought, I am what I am. Have we ever made that statement? I am what I am. Yeah, but I wasn't who I thought I was. And the thing about these steps is that change comes from the inside, and it comes without my permission. Yeah. It took some work to get the ball rolling. But when I got to that 7th step and said, God, just please, just do what you got to do. And whatever you leave, I'll deal with. But remind you, God never takes away what he's already given you. I still like what I like when it comes to the things I do. Like I said, they made the opposite sex attractive. But guess what? If you like big booty girls, you're going to always like big booty girls. That's just the way it's going to be. But what happened for me was, and I use this analogy, the Mercedes-Benz E300 with the AMG pack, I love that car. Every time I see one, I go, man, look at that mug there. But I ain't going to go out and buy it because I can't afford the note or the insurance. So that's how I treat them big booty girls. They're still nice to look at, but I can't afford what it's going to cost me, on my spirits to go out there and mess with it like I used to. I used to think I had to get them all. I don't have to do that anymore. See, understanding that I don't have the ability to remove character defects. Our literature says only God can remove it. Only God. And also understanding that most of my character defects are just as at a state of arrest. They're not gone. And they will flare up in a moment. Like I said, you catch me 90% of the time, I'm pretty spiritual. Catch me on a 10% day. Catch me on a 10% day. They flare up. But the thing I do now is, what happened is, once I finished 6 and 7 and looked at myself, you didn't seem that bad anymore, what you do, because I've looked at me. And what it's also do is help change my perspective of the people that I come in contact with, especially the members of this fellowship that I come in contact with. It's easier for me to just give you a break, because how they said we don't judge, but we judge. We judge all the time. We do. I've learned one of the most powerful tools in Narcotics Anonymous is learning how to mind my own business. Mm-hmm. Understanding that if God is, he is. And if God has got me, that means he's got you. It's just your path may be different. And it's not for me to judge what your path is. See, before, I was really big on that character defects of self-righteousness. What you should be doing. You 5 years clean, you should act such and such. You 40 years clean, you should act such and such. You should. My master says who? You? So you higher power today, huh? So you determine what's good for other people. And I just smile. Because how am I going to hold you to the standard of my defects when you don't allow me to live up to? But it happens. Because the natural man and the natural woman is always going to exist in us. And I would love to say I'm so spiritual that my feet don't touch the ground anymore. But that's not a reality. The reality is the natural man, he gets hungry, he gets lustful, he gets angry, he gets resentful, he gets all those things. But what the steps has allowed me is tools to deal with it, to identify when I see me coming. And I have a chance to do something about it and not let it be a problem in my day. And that's the difference in where I was 22 years ago with this thing. You know, just like Chet said, I've been clean a long time, and I'm still learning. I got a new sponsor. Just him and I just started this relationship 3 weeks ago, and we're beginning another fourth step starting after this thing here. Next week when we go back. But the guys that he's put in my life over the years have been, matter of fact, all of them are still alive. Yeah, all of them still alive. The first sponsor I had was an AA sponsor, because in 1987 wasn't a whole lot of NA. It just wasn't. Now you can go to a meeting 7 days a week, 3 times a day. Back then you'd have to ride to go to a meeting if you wanted to go to an NA meeting. And he was the guy who told me that I should probably go to NA, because he didn't understand what a crackhead was like, right? He understood what a drink was like, but he didn't understand. So I appreciate him that. And that's when I met the guy I had been with for all these years. And when I came to Georgia, he told me, you know what? You need to get you a sponsor who can put their eye on you, because you will outsmart yourself. He said, now, I'm still your friend, and you can call me anytime. Anytime you need me, I got nothing but love for you. But you need somebody that you can see. So I actually picked a sponsor that I had 10 years more time in, because he knew something I didn't know. He knew the flat book, and I didn't. He taught me how to sponsor out of the flat book, because I knew the generation coming behind me that's the tool that they're using. They weren't using the worksheets that we used back in the day. So the people was like, you got 10 years more in your sponsor? Yeah. So it doesn't matter about time when it comes to things like that. So now I got another sponsor. Him and I, we had a good relationship. I was with him for over 10 years while I was here, since I've been in Georgia. And I learned a lot from him. And he's moving on to some things, so I got another sponsor. And it's interesting, though, 4, 5, 6, and 7 is just a look in the mirror. 4, 5, 6, and 7 is where we find that courage. We learn that deeper level of surrender. And we honestly look at ourselves for who we really, really are. Not for who we think we are, but who we really are. It's a shame that, I know if any of y'all were anything like me, when I was using, there was times I looked at myself in the mirror and cried. And the odd thing about it is, there have been times clean, going through the steps, that the steps have forced me to look in the mirror and cry. Because I had to mourn that guy when he died. That guy I had invented. He didn't, like I said, because he didn't go down easy. But I had to mourn him. But the beauty of it all is, I had all you guys. So, if you're newer than me, or if you've been here longer than me, 4, 5, 6, and 7 is very important. Your pastor said, welcome to the world. When I finished 4, 5, 6, and 7, 4 and 5, my sponsor said, welcome to the Fellowship of Narcotics Anonymous. He said 1, 2, or 3 gets you around the fellowship. 4 and 5 gets you in the fellowship, into the program of Narcotics Anonymous. So, welcome to Narcotics Anonymous. Okay? Again, thank you guys for letting me share.
Thanks, Joe.